Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. So good to see so many faces. All right, well, we'll still have some folks joining us, but while they are hopping on, I'll do a little shop recap. First of all, hello everyone, I'm Caitlin Mahoney. I am the marketing director here with Ocean First. Most of our staff is out diving in Socorro right now, so you have me as your MC this evening. So a little recap of what's going on at the shop before I introduce our wonderful presenter tonight, Mr. David Charash. So from our swim school, in case you didn't know, we run lessons from 6 months old all the way up to adults. So if you feel like you ever need to brush up on your skills, we can accommodate you. Come and see us. And then for our divers in the group, our open water classes are just booking up left, right, and sideways. We are totally booked through July, and August is filling up fast. So if you have plans coming up in the future that you really want to get certified for before you go on a trip, make sure to plan ahead. And then on that same note, our trips are also just booking up so quickly. Everybody is getting vaccinated and getting ready to get out of their homes and go travel and see the world that we've been missing. So we do have a few open spots for some trips still this year. We're going to be going to Isla Mujeres in August, which will be your chance to snorkel with the whale sharks. And we have Catalina, which is a great domestic option, some chilly water in California. We'll be going out there in September. We just added a trip to Bonaire in October. And then we're going to St. Lucia over Thanksgiving, and we'll be ringing in the new year in Fiji. So if you are itching to get out, please see Amy with our travel department. And we are really excited to announce that we are going to be having our summer party this year. And you can mark your calendars. That will be on July 24th. Next month, World Ocean Day is coming up. If you didn't know already, June 8th. We are really excited because we're going to host our first in-person social for it. We are doing a capacity limit of about 20 folks and some people from the shop. So space will be limited. So just hop on our website and our calendar of events, and you can reserve your space. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. David Charash, who is a NOAA dive medicine physician, a dive medical physical examiner, a DAN instructor, a DAN referral physician, and a recreational diver. He lectures across the country on dive physics, dive physiology, and dive medicine. Tonight, he will be giving us a presentation on his time aboard the Aquarius Reef Base Mission 31 with Fabian Cousteau. So, David, I will hand it over to you.
All right. Well, thanks, Caitlin, for reaching out, and it's really a delight to be here. I'd much rather be there in person, and but this isn't bad. This week, I'm at Divers Alert Network headquarters in Durham, getting trained on some of the diving research that is undergoing currently on the medical aspects of injured divers and bubble studies using Dopplers and cardiac studies on public safety divers and recreational divers. With that in mind, let me just pull up my slides here. Just give me 1 second. Okay, can everyone see the slides okay? Yep, okay. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to give a presentation. It's actually sort of a story about my time aboard Aquarius Reef Base and how that came about. But because I am a dive physician, I'll throw in a couple of medical tips that I think that are important, because that's kind of what I do for a living. And then at the end, if it's okay with you, depending on how many people we'll have, can open up mics, and I'm very up to answering questions, not only about this presentation, but any aspects of medical fitness, dive medical fitness that you may have. So My background, I'm trained in emergency medicine and undersea and hyperbaric medicine. I initially started my training in hyperbarics in 1992 in Michigan. We had the only hyperbaric chamber in the state of Michigan. And my experience then were taking care of injured divers and critically ill, patients in the hyperbaric chamber, and spent 28 plus years working in emergency medicine, hyperbaric, and in Connecticut, where I've been practicing all these years, have established myself as a NOAA trained dive medicine physician, where I work with all agencies, the military divers, commercial divers, public safety divers, scientific divers, and certainly the recreational technical diving communities, and focus a lot of my work in dive medicine on creating lectures, programs on dive safety, dive technology, and dive medicine, and focus that, currently not only nationally, but internationally. So the talk is really preparing for that epic dive, and I thought I would look up the definition of what is epic. And it's a slang term meaning very extremely, and we have all these descriptives of what's epic, right? And so epic to each of us has a different meaning. And so when we ask the question is, what is your epic dive? Caitlin just mentioned that she's recently become a diver, right? And it could be that epic dive could be that very first open water dive that I ever took that was so eye-opening and jaw-dropping that was the best dive of your life. It could be that many years of training and certifications and experience you into Truck Lagoon and some wreck diving, off of battleships, and if that's your interest, and that could be an epic dive. It could also be that epic dive, up in Alaska. This flying over Denali Mountain, iceberg diving. That could be, a fun epic dive. And then, depending on where in the world your epic dive is, how high up in altitude the epic dive is, or in depth, whether you're going to a expedition in the desert, the jungle, or some foreign ocean, that epic dive can be in your backyard, right? And it depends on where and how you define what is an epic dive. So as I mentioned, I do a lot of conferences, and I put on an annual dive medicine conference, which is opened up actually to the diving community as well as the dive as non-dive physicians. And the goal of that is to really bring the diving community, educate them on issues related to dive safety, dive technology, and dive medicine, but also educate the medical providers about what dive medicine is. And you're probably aware, if you've gone to your medical doctor and asked for a medical fitness examination, that most physicians don't know much about dive medicine. And yet they're the ones who have to make a decision if you have a medical problem, whether you can dive or not. So in 2014, I'm putting on my annual dive conference. And I also, at the time, had a practice in my office where I would do dive medical fitness examinations. And so I get a phone call that afternoon about my patients for the next day. And they said, you have a special VIP patient. And I go, whatever, put them on schedule and I'll see him tomorrow. So I show up at the office forgetting that I have this special VIP patient. And it turns out that my patient was Fabien Cousteau, who is the grandson of Jacques Cousteau, son of Jean-Michel Cousteau, who's a third generation ocean explorer, videographer, and ocean conservationist. And so I did my dive fitness examination, and he was explaining that in the next month and a half or so, he was going to be going on a mission, a scientific mission aboard Aquarius Reef Base, and it was going to be one of his epic dives. And I said, yeah, whatever. I've got another patient. Let's speed it up, my friend. And then I had a brilliant idea. I said, hey, would you like to be a speaker at my dive conference, because we would invite 4 or 5 national leaders in the various aspects of dive safety, dive technology, and dive medicine. Thought, wow, it'd be pretty cool if Cousteau could come to my symposium. And sure enough, he said yes. And so on April 5th of 2014, the featured speaker was Fabien Cousteau. We had about 275 people attending for the half-day, program. And here is Fabien at the hotel talking about the legacy of being a Cousteau and some of the many stories about his grandfather and his father, Jean-Michel and Jacques Cousteau. And he was kind of giving the overview in 1957. Jacques Cousteau and Frédéric Dumas wrote a text or a book on their experiences undersea, the silent world. And it was really one of the first written books about ocean exploration. And this is before Facebook and LinkedIn and public media. And people read this book and they fell in love with the idea of ocean exploration and the sort of mystery of being at sea. And as a result, the dive industry from this point on continued to grow. And here is Jacques Cousteau in an underwater habitat. So one of the things that Jacques Cousteau felt were and had questions about were, could we sustain life underwater, and why wouldn't we do that? Now, look at the way you would sustain life underwater: smoking cigarettes and drinking lots of wine. His wife Simone is with her back to him, and this is his crew. Anyone living in an underwater habitat at that time was called an oceanaut if you stayed underwater in this chamber for greater than 24 hours. And the questions that Jacques Cousteau asked were, can humans stay underwater for extended periods, and what are the benefits and what are the challenges and what are the risks? And he explored that by building these underwater habitats and answering those questions. And in 1962, Cousteau had the first underwater habitat. And in a number of years later, about 2 years later, he had another underwater habitat where 6 men were breathing a mixture of nitrogen and oxygen at 35 feet for 7 days. And then in 64, an additional habitat was built for the military purposes. And in a few years later, Cousteau had an additional underwater habitat in which 7 oceanauts lived for 30 days at 36 feet. And this cone shelf, too, is an important marker for the historical perspective of underwater habitat. So Mission 31 is a 50-year later celebration of Jacques Cousteau's Cone Shelf 2, and the mission took place at Aquarius Reef Base, which is the only existing remaining underwater habitat in the world. The habitat was originally owned by National Oceanographic Atmospheric Agency, and they were going to basically take it out of the water and demolish it because of the increased cost, and there wasn't getting a lot of use. They donated the chamber to Florida International University, and even after many years under Florida International University's care, it was too costly and there wasn't a lot of research going on. So Cousteau and a bunch of friends got some funds together, and they put together a Mission 31, which is going to be a scientific mission that was going to last 31 days. And the depth of this chamber, by the way, is at 60 feet. And the date for this mission was June 2nd through July 2nd in 2014. So remember, he came to the conference in April, and now the mission is actually going to be a live mission from June to July of that year. And it had 3 scientific goals, looking at climate change, ocean pollution, and decline of biodiversity. And it had scientists from Northeastern University, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and Florida International University. The Aquarius Reef Base is located 9 miles offshore off Isla Mirada in Florida. It's an 81-ton habitat, 63 feet underwater, and it's the size of a large Class A RV. It's 43 feet by 20 feet by 16 feet. And here is that image. This is an image I took with my GoPro on my day aboard Aquarius Reef Base, which makes a cool backdrop when I give this lecture. And this is a cutaway, and you can see on the far left, there's bunk beds. Actually, it has enough for 6 people to live on board. 3 were the PhD scientists from the various universities, Fabian Cousteau the fourth, and then 2 life support technicians who basically stayed on board for the 31 days to perform the various components of research. And this is what that underwater habitat looks like when it came out of water during a hurricane in the Caribbean. It was almost destroyed. It had to be removed from the water. It came to shore on dry dock and was repaired. And NOAA then assumed care with Florida International University, and it was put in the waters in 1987 at Isla Morada. So like with Good Day Dive Conference, we have a raffle, right, at this show. And at the end of the day, Fabian said, "Hey, Dave, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. It was really great and certainly was helpful in getting a lot of attendance. If you want to build up your numbers for a show, you want to get a superstar." We certainly had it there. And then he asked me, I need to get trained in DAN first aid and advanced oxygen. Do I know any DAN instructors? And I said, why? I'm a DAN instructor. So the very next weekend, Fabian Cousteau was at my house, and I gave him my training in first aid and CPR and advanced O2 and hazardous marine life. So he spent the full day with me, and it was a pretty cool experience. I mean, it was one-on-one, but just the idea that Cousteau's in my house, right, and where I'm teaching him something. And at the very end, he was very appreciative of the fact that I gave up a Saturday to speak with him and spend the time with him, and to do it in a quick and expeditious fashion. And at the end of all this, he said, "Hey, would you like to join me on the habitat as a VIP diver? On each of the 31 days of the mission, 2 people would dive in and spend a couple of hours, diving around Aquarius Reef Base and then going in and sitting down and meeting the crew." And he mentioned the date. My date would be June 22nd of that year. And I thought about it for a second. I realized that was the week my daughter was graduating high school, and that I also was committed to go to a hyperbaric conference in St. Louis. So I thought about it for a second. I said, I really love to do it, but I have too many things going on, and it's kind of short notice. I said it very nicely, of course. He left, and as he drove down the hill, I shook my head and going, I can't believe I said no to Cousteau. So I called my wife, who was at work, and I told him about my great day of teaching and spending it with Cousteau, and that he invited me to join him. And I, of course, said, I can't do that because I have my obligations. And my wife said, "Are you crazy?" So later that night, I gave him a call and I said, "Thanks for coming out. I hope you learn as much as you can learn in a day or so." But when I said no, I really meant yes. So with that, I prepared myself for a day diving aboard Aquarius Reef Base. So that was now going to be my big adventure, my epic dive, although I hadn't been there yet, so I didn't know quite what to expect. So I had to prepare for this great adventure and this epic dive, and I'm going to share with you sort of the things I had to do to prepare myself for this epic dive. And these are the sort of things that I do every day when I put my fins on before I go in the water, which is no different than it's a routine dive. And that is, we need to have some sort of dive plan. And think about the bigger picture for a 31-day mission with 6 souls on board Aquarius Reef Base, when the fees for this Aquarius Reef Base were $190,000 a day for 31 days, and how many support personnel, and how do we make this plan? So we define what a dive plan is, the purpose of preparing a dive plan to assure the dive operation will be conducted safely, efficiently, and with the maximum chance of achieving the objectives. So for you and me, it's getting out of the water safely and going home at the end of the day. And of course, having fun or enjoying it. But for a dive operation or a dive boat, right, they're looking at a bigger global picture or a scientific adventure, such as Aquarius Reef Base on a live mission. And so when you're planning your dive, it's really a function of what kind of dive are you and what is your work requirement. So we know that as a recreational diver diving in warm waters with great visibility, with low current and low winds on air, that work requirement is going to be quite different than a military diver who is going to jump out of a plane at 30,000 feet on 100% oxygen, and then find himself in the ocean to dive 60 feet below, swim 1 mile, accomplish his task, and then egress back to a submarine, right? A different kind of diver. And each of those different divers have different work requirements. So when we look at our dive, and this is a cliche, but I really believe it's important for all of us as divers to plan your dive and dive your plan, to be prepared. And how do we be prepared? We stay within your limits, right? And we'll talk about what our limits are, as we have, many of us have been out of the water for greater than 15 months or more because of COVID. And then what's your level of experience for that task at hand? So is it a simple recreational dive, or are you challenged and having to dive above your limits? And your degree of fitness, what is that fitness for that particular dive or task? And then is the equipment you have serviceable? Do you know how to operate it in a safe manner? And so checklists are important if you use them properly, and developing a checklist before you put your fins on and go into the water, understanding your training and experience, the equipment, looking at dive site and dive profile for the day, contingency and emergency plans are all part of that dive planning. And so when we think about the risks of diving, right, these risks of barotrauma, decompression, illness, arterial gas embolism, panic, drowning, and traumatic events are the same risks for any class of diver, right? And depending on the work requirement, the risks can be far greater for a recreational diver who is ill-prepared or ill-trained and could get an arterial gas embolism if they breath hold on descent, for example. So understanding what the risks are and your degree of fitness are really important, because the last thing any of us want to be on that epic dive or our recreational dive is diving fatality, right? Because we know that diving fatalities are a result of issues related to the effects of pressure, the gases, mechanical trauma, insufficient breathing gas, hazardous marine life or oxygen toxicity, or inevitable natural disease. As we get older, we are starting to acquire some of the issues of, weight, obesity, diabetes, high cholesterol, other things may increase our risk for diving injury, diving accident, or unfortunately a diving fatality. So having this emergency action plan, when you go on a dive boat, typically that's done in advance with a group, if you're in a professional group or organization, but each and every one of us, when we are on a dive site, wherever it might be, needs to know what that emergency action plan is. And then although I teach, I'm a DAN instructor, DAN referral physician, I don't get paid by Divers Alert Network. However, you need to have some sort of dive insurance, and it doesn't have to be DAN insurance. Dive Assure is primary insurance, where DAN insurance is secondary insurance, but you need to be covered because typical health insurance may not be enough to help you when you really need it. So if you are unaware of what the opportunities are for DAN or Dive Assure insurance or diving insurance, you really need to have that before you put your fins on that day. Quickly, we'll talk about fitness to dive, which I think is really important because, as most of us, I haven't been in the water for over 2 years, part of it because I started a new position where I had too many responsibilities and not enough time, and then COVID hit. But each of us have the many reasons why we haven't been in the water. And so when we think about our fitness to dive consists of 6 areas of medical fitness, psychological fitness, nutrition, physical fitness, knowledge, and physical skill. And no matter whether you're that recreational, the technical, the public safety diver, depending on your work requirement, you need to fulfill certain requirements of each of these areas to safely dive. And as many of us have become deconditioned physically because of the lack of exercise and mobility and travel, and the fact that we're not diving on a regular basis, right? We need to really get back into that physical fitness, that mindset and review of skills as we go forward here. And then, of course, the last thing you really wanted me to talk about was COVID-19. And why does that have anything to do with the epic dive? And that's because this is something that has affected each and every one of us, whether you actually became infected or not. If you haven't been exercising and you're not as physically fit as you can be, it's affected you indirectly. It's affected all of us financially, socially, and psychologically. And then if you have had COVID-19, then the question is, how are you to become fit to dive, and who should determine if you're fit to dive? And I want to just make you aware that July of this past year, the previous dive fitness forms, which are on the right here, the Recreational Scuba Training Council forms, which we all have signed when we started our diving career, it's a new form effective July of this past year. This form is something that was developed by an international council of diving experts, and it's something that has been approved by Divers Alert Network of all countries, Undersea and Hyperbaric Medicine Society, the European Diving Society, and all of the training agencies. And this has been so updated that it includes issues relevant to COVID-19. Now, the purpose of this talk is not to go into COVID-19, so I'll just leave it that you really should review this document, which you can pick off the DIAN website for free, or the Undersea and Hyperbaric Medicine Society. So for me to dive on the Aquarius Reef Base, the divers had to have the physical fitness and medical fitness requirements of a scientific diver based on the American Academy of Underwater Sciences. And it's a bit more detailed than the typical recreational diver form. And I, even though I was only going for one day and didn't have to go through all of these screening tests, I went through these screening tests based on my age and medical history, which included an EKG stress test, pulmonary function study, X-ray, urine blood test, and cardiac screening. And in addition, they required that everyone who were the aquanauts working in this environment had to complete a watermanship criteria swim test, swimming 550-yard swim in 15 minutes, swim 25 yards underwater without surfacing, and then a 30-minute float. And these are the previous NOAA program swim test requirements. And then what about my equipment? So this is the equipment list they said I need to bring. And so this is just purely a recreational dive. This is all my equipment on which I had it serviced in advance to make sure that everything is working properly, that if I needed to replace anything before my adventure, I certainly didn't want it to be a misadventure. And then how do I get it down there, right, as efficiently as I can, and make sure it gets there in one piece. And I needed to photograph this event, right, this epic dive, and what equipment. And I had a GoPro, but I never used it underwater. So I needed lights, I thought. So I bought lights and a tree and all kinds of expensive things. And here I am on my morning of my dive for Aquarius Reef Base, and this is mission headquarters in Islamorada. And I had to be there at 6 in the morning, or 0600, and it was a very organized process. Everything is, choreographed down to the last minute. Everyone has a task, an assignment, I am you call a VIP diver. The escort diver, who was the diver that escorted me from surface into the Aquarius Reef Base into the surface, was Tom Potts. The boat captain, everyone had a task at hand. And in addition, I had to be very aware of what the risks are. And so as we all dive on a various dive adventure trip, we really need to understand what those risks are for the given dive that we're about to undertake. And then, of course, every dive requires and should require some sort of dive briefing. This is pretty simple. You can see here, you're going to get out of the boat, you're going to jump in the water, and you're going to go into Aquarius Reef Base. So that was a pretty simple dive, right? And I was going to follow Tom Potts, who was the lead diver. And that was as simple as it gets, but nonetheless, something that we need to discuss. And so here I am, we're loading up the boat. And the dive log, just so I can prove that I actually made it there. Number 6 or 7 on the list, with Cousteau off to the top and the date and time. And again, I think it's important that when you are doing your epic dive, you have more than a memory, right? Memory is important, but for me, with technology, cell phones and GoPros, and again, I don't get a percentage from GoPro either. We have the ability to sort of record what we think are these epic events. And it is important that we, have some historical perspective when it's that important. So the boat trip is 9 miles out. This is called the life support buoy. Attached to the life support buoy is a cable that goes all the way down to Aquarius Reef Base, which is 60 feet below. And that cable attached to the life support buoy has a generator, it has communication equipment, brings in fresh air, and is really the lifeline for Aquarius Reef Base. And this is off the stern of Aquarius Reef Base. The water diving conditions were like unbelievable. This is, 9 miles off Isla Morada, great visibility. Water temperature was 76 degrees, so it doesn't get much better than that. And because Mission 31 was an internationally promoted event, they had both above water, underwater photography. They had live feed cameras running both surrounding Aquarius Reef Base and live feed within the Aquarius Reef Base habitat. So for the 31-day mission, you could take a look at any one of the areas and kind of be part of the mission itself. So now I'm pointing this out that I've got this big contraption here that I've never used underwater. And I said to myself, if I've never used this underwater, am I going to mess up? Am I going to have issues with my buoyancy? Am I going to look like a rookie? Am I going to my camera? Am I going to be distracted from the task, right? Because I'm task loaded. So I had option 2, which was to bring the camera, but you can see on my right wrist, to just put the GoPro on a wrist. And what I did is I actually practiced my diving at home, using my boat trailer as sort of this large Aquarius habitat. And I practiced with my arm outstretched with my GoPro on, with my iPad in front of me, practicing how I would control my buoyancy and swim, but yet continue to take photographs once I got in the water. So what I did was I shot video. As soon as I hit the water, I turned the video on. I had a red filter on, but I wasn't distracted by having to carry extra items and the concern of all those things when you have new equipment. So here I am on the far left, about ready to jump in the water. And remember, I had prepared all this dive equipment, had it certified and checked by my dive shop, and paid to have it transported down to Florida. And as soon as I got there, they said, no, we're not going to let you use your equipment. We're going to use our old Navy equipment, and you're going to dive on our regulators. We're not even going to let you go into a wetsuit because you're not going to have time to get in and out of your wetsuit because you're going to incur a deco time, which we don't want you to do. So put your fins on, your mask, and we'll take care of everything else. So as they say in the Navy, yes, sir, and I did that. And so here we are. Tom Potts is the diver to the far left here. I'm in the middle, and then to the right is one of the graduate students who sort of on every dive is accompanying the VIP diver. And here I am going in on someone else's equipment, which I never really was fond of. I always like to dive on my own equipment. And then as soon as we touched down in the water, splashed in, it was just a surreal experience. And here, this is me with my GoPro taking pictures of Tom Potts and then a graduate student. And you can see the student has in his hand looks like a big bucket. It's actually a pressurized chamber in which they can bring items from surface down. It's pressurized. So if you have food, you can bring equipment in, news, magazines into the chamber and would remain dry. And typically on a daily basis, they would bring in baked goods and fresh foods for the 6 people that were living down there for the 31 days. In addition, they would use that as another pot to bring out dirty laundry, because you don't want to have 31 days worth of clothing and linens for your divers who were there for 31 days. And the visibility was really awesome. This is a escape hatch, this little white octagonal thing, and whatever a 6-sided thing is, right? Can't remember anymore. And so if you were in the Aquarius Reef Base and it got contaminated with high elevations of CO2 or carbon monoxide or smoke or hazard, everyone could escape from Aquarius Reef Base, go into this small escape hatch, they pull a panic button, and they could go into this. There's an extra air supply and scuba tanks, and the emergency crew would come out and rescue them from there. And you can see one of the scientists who is doing some work in the corner here in a hard hat. And this is one of the records spent on that day. One of the benefits to being in Aquarius or underwater habitat is you can perform scientific testing for indefinite periods of time, because you're not worried about going to the surface and having to decompress. So you sleep in the chamber at night, and in the day you get in your dive gear, you go out and you perform work, and you get back in the chamber, you take your gear off, you shower, you have dinner, and you go to bed, and you wake up and you continue to work without having to worry about getting bent, because you're staying at that depth for some extended period of time. And this day, this was one of the PhD scientists, McGee, and she broke the record of being out there working for 5 hours and 55 minutes continuously without shuddering an extra, concern. Went in, took a shower, and rested, had a nice meal. And so everyone who is one of the astronauts had part add an additional degree of safety. They all had umbilical cords attached to Aquarius Reef Base, so they would have redundant supplies of air and communication. And then the divers in the background that you see there are rescue divers, Navy divers, or the videographers. And this is the wet porch in which you would dive under the Aquarius habitat. You would take your gear off, and you can see he's putting in that pressure pot, which is delivering some dry goods. You get out of this wet porch, and you'd have to take a shower before you would be allowed inside. And the reason you took a shower is because all the contamination, the bacteria, the funguses, the molds, the debris in the ocean could potentially cause an infection to the inhabitants. And so hygiene was really an important component of living in this underwater habitat. And then when I got into the chamber, this is in the habitat. In front of me is Fabien Cousteau, and they said, "Oh, why don't you sit down and interview Fabien Cousteau?" And so I said, "Oh, okay." So they put me on a microphone. There's a $10,000 camera there with a professional photographer. And now on the spot, I'm giving an interview to Fabian Cousteau. And the porthole to the left of me, I'm seeing barracuda and all kinds of animal life just swimming by. I've got a Fabian Cousteau in front of me, and I've got a $10,000 movie camera to the right of me. And at the end of this interview, I'm now going to get back in my gear, go back in that wet porch, and then continue my tour of the facility. And unlike any good dive, right, with a VIP, I guess I was a VIP, it required a selfie. So got a bunch of selfies. I actually gave Fabian Cousteau one of my favorite Dan hats at the time as a little, if you will. I kind of, matched these two photographs of, Fabian Cousteau and myself, and then above it, his grandfather. Now, we didn't have any booze and we don't smoke cigarettes, but to me, for me, this was that epic dive. So what I'd like to do is share with you then, it's about a 9-minute video of my underwater time, and I'll sort of narrate it. I'm hoping that the signals are okay, that you can hear me as I talk this. So again, this is day 22, and all this is coming off of my GoPro that I have on my wrist. And all I did was I turned it on and kept it on until the battery went out. So you can see below the Aquarius Reef Base, and then off to the right, you're going to see that life support buoy, which is ever present and an important thing that needs to be maintained to supply air and communication to the people below. And we can see that cutaway cable, which is an important lifeline to the Aquarius habitat below. And so, as we prepared in a very orchestrated manner, we're diving into Aquarius Reef Base. The base, the feet are at 65 feet. The roof of this is at 35 feet and the floor is at 45 feet or so. And we could never go below 45 feet. Otherwise, we'd incur decompression time. So here's us going into the wet porch, getting our gear off, and we have to remove our camera. We can't bring the cameras in because air expands when pressure changes and it could cause some sort of catastrophic explosion. Here, this is my daughter taking this picture live feed of my interview from home. And in front of me is a bowl of M&Ms, chocolate-covered M&Ms. And throughout the interview, Cousteau kept eating these chocolate-covered M&Ms. And it's probably about like 9 or so in the morning. I'm staring at him. I'm staring at the barracuda to the left. I'm staring at the camera, but now I'm starting to stare at the M&Ms, and I'm getting kind of hungry. But I can't pick and eat the candies, but I'm getting really hungry. And after selfie here, I started eating some M&Ms. Now I'm totally drenched in sweat. Why? Because when you're at depth, right, temperature goes up, goes up. And that can be a variable. Look at Cousteau. He's got a hoodie on. He's been down there for 22 days and his body is acclimatized to those hot, humid conditions. So here I've got my gear on. I'm following Tom Potts and the graduate student, and we're doing basically a 720-degree swim around Aquarius Reef Base. So really great visibility, abundant plant life, animal life. And because this is a protected area, there's no overfishing or dredging. And so the coral, the reef life is really abundant. You can see the corals are now growing into the habitat. This is a famous porthole from the outside. And if I was a VIP diver that contributed $1 million like Bruce Willis did, and he came down one day, Cousteau would come out on the other side of the window and take and wave for a photo op. So really neat. Now you see those air cylinders off right in the center. those are the air supply for that escape hatch that we'll take a look at, that six-sided chamber. And then we're going to see one of the underwater scientists. She's at 60 feet. Remember, I can't go below 45 feet. So she's going to come up and we're going to try and exchange a high five. She has been working out there for some 5 hours and 55 minutes, which was the record for anyone being out of the habitat at that time. So really impressive work. And again, they used the hard hats because they didn't want anyone of the 6 aquanauts to get injured from an object that would fall, per se. And then the umbilical cord that they used was there for a safety feature so they wouldn't get lost or dispersed. So here we are just sort of floating. You may catch a little glimpse of this line. It looks like a rope, if you will. And there are ropes that went out in 360-degree radius. And they're there for purposes of that if you were to get lost when you were out doing your work and your umbilical disconnected, you had an auxiliary air, you would then search around for a line, and the lines had an arrow that pointed you back to Aquarius Reef Base. So even if you got disconnected and got lost because visibility was horrible, you should be able to get back to Aquarius Reef Base. So this is, I did 2 dives that day. One was at 9:30, the other one was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So pretty long surface interval, while the other VIP diver went down when I came up. And each of us had the opportunity to go inside and sit down with Cousteau and get a tour of the facility. So now we're making a slow ascent to the surface. Now he's getting the signal, Tom Potts is giving the signal for the grad student to go in and get the pot that's filled with dirty laundry. And dirty laundries are in a key because at high humidity and high temperature that sits in this chamber for 31 days can breed bacteria. And if one of the aquanauts got sick because of skin infection, for example, or contamination, and someone ended up with a GI infection, the whole mission would be scrubbed. So hygiene is so important that showers when you come in, every day, all equipment cleaned. Everyone has to maintain the degree of fitness, expertise, and knowledge based on the level of diving. So here it's kind of this cool thing. Look at all the coral that's just growing on this thing. And right here at the roof of this, it's at 35 feet. Now, this was in 2014, so I didn't have as many dives as I have now. And when we're doing our safety stop, there's a line, an anchor line, and I'm sort of holding on to it. And as I'm holding on to it, I'm going up and down with the current, right? It's going up and down. And every time I pull on it, it's sending a ping to this, causing a loud banging sound. And see, here's my hand, which you should never put your hand on a line. And as such, it caused a lot of distress to the divers because there is getting all this loud extraneous noise. Now, some of you may notice that as I come to the surface, it's starting to turn red, and that's because I put my red filter on my camera, and as I come to the surface, right, when you go from the surface down, you're losing various colors. That's why when we go at great depths, you don't lose your color perception. If you put a red filter on it, you can correct for that, and that's why below 6 to 8 feet, I had really clear blue water. But now as I'm going up above surface with the red filter on it, now I have an increased amount of redness to the area. But what I didn't want to do was start changing filters and flipping things and moving things when all I wanted to do was focus my attention on my dive. And but what a beautiful scene this is, right? As I come to the surface, just reflecting on, how lucky I am to have been there. The VIP diver exits first. And then everyone else goes. Now, the grad student has this pressure pot, which is essentially the dirty laundry. And his job as a grad student is to bring the pot in and bring the pot back. So here we go. I get the signal to exit and make my way aboard the vessel and have a great surface interval, hydrate up. And the only food I had to that point were about a handful of chocolate-covered M&Ms because I didn't want to have breakfast that morning. And so here's us making our way back to shore, 9 miles, about 3:34 in the afternoon. And just what an incredible day that was weather-wise. And at the end of all this, just a great experience. So the bottom line here is that there's a great book I would recommend. Dan Orr and Douglas wrote a book on sort of preventing accidents, right? And I always think about this as a dive physician. I never want to be a statistic, right? I want to be a happy diver. I want to get home safely. But more importantly, my patients, the people that I lecture or speak to, I want you to also be safe. And so the key things that Dan Orr and Douglas in their book talk about with diving within your limits of training and making sure you have the right gear, and that if you haven't been in the water for a while, that refresher course. Certainly being rescue certified will be an important part of your recreational diver training. And practice those safety skills, physical fitness, remember those 6 components, and stay within your personal safety envelope. So if I wasn't comfortable with that 65-foot dive, which it wasn't much of a recreational dive in reality, but for some it could be. And so ultimately, diving smart means that you're addressing those 6 components of fitness based on the type of diving, understanding that even though right now I may not be medically fit or physically fit because I'm deconditioned, I may have had COVID, I had pneumonia, whatever those issues are, you look towards the long-term goals of addressing that, becoming fit to dive, and then diving within those limits. And, I'm preaching to the choir when, your group goes online on your night off to learn. You're here because you want to learn, you want to engage, you want to be better at whatever you're doing in diving. But, I wish I could give that same message to the people that aren't on this today, right? So diver education and training is really important. And each and every one of you should be certified in CPR. That is a minimum, because if someone goes into a cardiac arrest and you are not able to administer CPR, it's just inexcusable. So ultimately, you're going to plan your dive and dive your plan. So with that in mind, I want to thank you for your attention. Again, Caitlin, thank you very much for reaching out and asking me to speak here today. I'm happy to, if you want to just open up your microphones, ask questions. This is my contact information. I have a consulting business in dive medicine, hyperbaric medicine. You can access my website. I have Facebook, which is Dive Medicine Conference, Gmail, that's my cell phone. You're always welcome to call if you have a question. I don't get phone calls that I'm hung over what I should do, but I don't mind taking a phone call or two if it's something that you think is important from a medical perspective. All right, so questions, open up, let's have a conversation.
This is Rachel. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you, Rachel. Hi.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. And I love all your tips. They're so true. Refreshers are, we can constantly relearn, what we think we know. I have just some questions about the habitat. How long has it been down there? How old is it? And how do those divers, when they leave, I assume they go through a long decompression?
Yeah, so let's take it, we'll start the last question first. So it's at 65 feet, and the reason they chose 65 feet, remember the base or the footings are at 65 feet, but the chamber itself is actually at 45 feet. At 45 feet, they can put in air and not have to put in things like helium and oxygen. Because if you put in helium and oxygen, there's increased cost. And there's an increased risk for things like oxygen toxicity at greater depths. So keeping it at 45 feet with air, it is safer and less expensive to maintain that. Once you're fully saturated, right? And typically the way they actually did that was they had 3 scientists who would, 6 people would go in, Cousteau, the 2 life support technologists, and 3 scientists would dive in. And on day 15, they would decompress for a total of 24 hours. In the chamber, they'd shut it off, they close the wet porch, they seal it, and they slowly decompress over 24 hours. During that 24-hour period, they'd all be lying in their racks, their bunks, with an oxygen mask on to help decompress. If anyone had an oxygen seizure, they wouldn't fall, they would still be in the bed. And after 24 hours, then 3 of the scientists would go to the surface, they just swim right to the surface and they wouldn't get bent because they fully decompressed. 3 new scientists would dive down for the day 15 through day 31, but Cousteau and the other 2 life support technicians stay down there for the total of 31 days. So at the end of that 31-day period, again, it was another 24 hours of decompression, and then they'd swim to the surface. In addition, that little exterior chamber, the emergency escape hatch, could also be configured to act as a decompression chamber, but they couldn't, if there was an emergency, no one could just swim to the surface because they would likely die if they were completely saturated. So they could sit in that chamber, a boat would come out, a rescue boat, and on the rescue boat would be a small hyperbaric chamber. And that hyperbaric chamber, if you came to the surface and were bent, you had to come to the surface, they'd throw you in that smaller chamber. They would immediately put you on the boat and drive you to shore. And at shore, they had their big multi-lock hyperbaric chamber. That's the one I had the picture with the camera on my wrist. And then they would take that small chamber and put you into the bigger chamber where you get continued decompression. But they'd only be able to do that for 1 person at a time. So if you really ran into trouble, you really would be in trouble, right? And that's why they kept it at that 45 feet on air to minimize that from happening. Could you get bent if you're in a saturation chamber? Sure. If you're at 45 feet and you're fully saturated, and then your divers leave the saturation chamber or the habitat, and then they go out what's called an excursion. They go out diving, but then they go down to 200 feet. When they come up from 200 feet to 45 feet, they are changing the ambient pressures. They could get bent. So there's special decompression tables for the habitat divers when they do excursions greater than the depth at which they're living at. Does that make sense for that question? And then as far as how old the chamber is, I know that in '88, it was put back in Isla Morada, and before that, I think it was about 80s, probably in the late 70s or so, where it was in the Caribbean somewhere at 60 plus feet. The exact age, I don't know. I do know that as a result of Mission 31, and it has really revived its utility, NASA uses the underwater habitat for its training of astronauts from around the world. And astronauts come there for 5 and 7 day missions where they practice. I didn't show you the picture. I have another video. There's actually a mock lunar landing at about 60 feet. And the aquanauts/astronauts will go out there in zero gravity and do various maneuvers, building and doing whatever one does as a astronaut training, and it's an international training process. So Florida International University, typically on 3 times a year, will have a 5 or 10 day mission with NASA. And in addition, if you are interested, I've seen in the past that Florida International University has a 1-day aquanaut certification course. So you go out there, you go to mission headquarters, you learn with the top experts in habitat medicine, if you will, and safety. and then you actually go into the habitat overnight and come back out, and you get a little card. Now, I'm not a proponent of collecting cards, but that would be a card I would want to have. And I think it's for that 24-hour period, I think it's maybe, $1,000. Seems pretty good deal for that. In addition, they have a dive medic training course that they run using the hyperbaric chamber. And then if any of you are into expedition medicine, annual basis, they have a expedition wilderness medicine hyperbaric physician course, which really kind of does a lot about training of dive safety and hyperbarics, but involving living on the habitat or saturation chamber. So I think I answered all your questions.
Yeah, I think you did. Thank you.
All right. Sure. Anyone else? And the questions can be on any topic. It doesn't have to be necessarily about what we've talked about. I'm happy to discuss anything while you got me here.
I have another question then, just
Yes.
curious. Has the habitat been used in the last year, 15 months with COVID?
No, it hasn't.
No, it hasn't. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's been a big issue. They still have to maintain it. They still have to go out and do the thing. The last hurricane, I can't keep up with hurricane. That life support cable from the life support buoy completely became disconnected, and they found the life support buoy floating some 40 miles up north, up in Florida somewhere, and that cost about $1 million+ of damage. And think about, to maintain this structure. I mean, you're in salt, right, with currents and waves and everything else. It is a undaunting task to maintain not only the integrity of the inside, but the outside of the chamber at great cost, right? At great cost. And that's why there are no more habitats around because of it. So this is the last of its kind. There won't be any others. And so you, as a recreational diver, could take a boat out there when it's not a mission, and you could dive around the Aquarius habitat, but it will be locked. You won't have to go on the inside. It's a marine protected sanctuary, but you are able to dive out there. It's a pretty cool place. And I'm sure the mission headquarters, though there's not much to see, they would welcome any one of you to sort of, go in and say hello. And just a plug for the History of Diving Museum, which is not too far from there, is another great place to visit if you happen to be in the area. Other questions?
So do you hire in your consult business?
No. So my wife has taken the Introduction to Hyperbaric Medicine course. So if I need backup, she'll be number one. But the kind of stuff that I do is very unique and individualized, and my wife's not a diver, so doesn't really help in that regard. But I do not only the dive medicine stuff, but I also am a hyperbaric doctor. So I do surveys for accreditation around the country. I go to hospitals looking at hyperbaric programs, and I'm also a wound care doctor. So I work at people hire me to evaluate their wound care hyperbaric programs and develop, better quality programs in that industry. So I have my hand in a lot of pots. The pot I like the most one is anything involving diving. And one of the things I had been, practicing all these years, taking care of patients, and, always, great, honor to do that. But when you do that, you can't do other things. And so I actually retired from my hospital practice in June of this year. I'm back in Connecticut, and I'm doing only those things that give me pleasure. And I'm fortunate that I can say that. And that's why I'm down here in Durham, because I've never been able to do research because I'm always too busy. I'm not a scientist. I don't have a PhD. I'm busy taking care of patients, and that can be, that's a full-time job. So now it's an opportunity for me to do research and go diving, to lecture to people in Colorado, would much rather do it in person maybe the next time. But, you know, this is just great opportunities to share knowledge and hopefully make it a safer day for each and every one of you.
We appreciate it.
Any other questions? If you, one of the things that comes up, it's topics on children and diving. I mean, I have probably well over 100 different topics in dive medicine, dive safety, dive technology. If you can go on my website, I have a couple of videos. If you Google children in diving, COVID-19 in diving, otic barotrauma, these are some of the ones I've put on this past year that are out there. So you can, you know, take a look at some of those, you know, discussions. And if you ever make it to any of the national dive shows, I speak at DEMA, Beneath the Sea, Boston Sea Rovers, DC Dive Show. I haven't yet been invited to anything out west. So I know some of them are now going out of business. But, you know, in the future, I'm always available for those sort of fun, you know, educational, but slash, you know, travel adventures. Any other questions?
What was the name of the book you mentioned at the end?
The book?
Yeah, you said that there was a book on safety, I think.
Oh, just look up Dan Orr. Let me just scroll back here. I don't. Yeah, this is it here. 7 tips. Well, just look up diving accidents and Dan Orr. It's published by Best Publishing Company. It's a paperback. It's probably $20-30 at best. If you go to a dive show, Dan Orr is a pretty popular, you know, prolific person. He'd be happy to autograph it for you, I'm sure.
And Orr is O-R-E.
Yeah, Dan and O-R-R.
And he's on Facebook too.
Yeah.
So he wrote the book, okay.
Well, he and Douglas, they co-authored, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? All right, well, thanks, everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity to meet you all. And hopefully we can do it in real time with fins on and our, you know, backpacks and ready to go. All right, thanks, Caitlin.
Thank you, David, so much. Thank you, everyone. We hope to see you
Have a good
soon
night.
next month.
Hopefully
Take care.
we'll see you in Colorado sometime, Dr. Charash.
I'd love to be there. That's one of the states on my bucket list. Haven't been there yet.
Great, do it. It's worth it.
I hear the diving's wonderful, right, Caitlin?
Yes.
Depends on where you want to go. Yes.
Yeah, I got it. All right, have a great night. Thanks.
Thank you. You too.
Bye, everyone.
All right, Caitlin, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
Have a good night.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
You take care. Bye-bye.